Kia ora koutou. Welcome again to our Waikato Affordable Energy series. My name's Harvey Brooks, and today we're really thrilled to have Manu Barrett joining us from Solar Sense. Before we hand over to Manu, I'll just start the hui and also just give a little bit of background for people who perhaps haven't been to our webinar series before. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we do start. It's probably best if you turn off your microphone if you're with us, just to make sure there is no background noise, unless you are speaking, of course. And if you, we are recording this webinar, so if you are concerned about your privacy, we acknowledge that. I suggest you turn off your camera. I have inadvertently turned off my camera, so I'm completely private, not meaning to be. Also, we will be making these recordings available on our website at the end of the presentation. In terms of questions and answers, we really do welcome those if you have any. What we would ask is that you hold the questions to the end, and then at the end I will ask Amy Van Garderen, who's our communications manager, to summarize the questions, just in case there are the same question getting asked more than once, and then we will put those to Manu for him to answer and to reflect upon. So that's the housekeeping. I'll just start us with a karakia. He karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai ehi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhunga, haumi e hui e, tai ki e. Okay, all right. Well, again, welcome to the webinar series, and this is about, I think, webinar number 6 now. So we're right into it now, and right into the depths of winter as well. So probably a good time to be doing that. I'll just put my presentation on full screen. Amy, can we see that on full screen?
Sorry. Yep, all good, Harvey.
Great. All right. Right. So just in terms of who we are today, obviously I'm Harvey Brooks. We have Ernie Newman, who's an independent competition expert and commentator, joining us for reflections at the end of the webinar. And so that's how we will end the conversation today. Just in terms of who Wellbeing Waikato is, if you haven't joined the hui before or heard of us, we're an independent charitable trust focused on gathering and sharing regional intelligence about what's most important to households and whānau, identifying emerging risks early, and surfacing underlying drivers of the systems that actually do significantly influence wellbeing, and not just describing symptoms. What we do is we convene the government, iwi, councils, community organisation, the private sector and people around decision useful insights, and we share those. And you can see some of the reports that we've developed over the last few years along the bottom. It's all available on our website and all freely available. You can go and grab it whenever you like. So why energy? Well, it's really at the heart of our economy, of our society, and in order for us to all enjoy well-being, that energy system needs to be affordable, reliable, and sustainable, and that often gets described as the energy trilemma. And in many cases, getting 2 of the 3 is achievable. Getting all 3 requires some trade-offs and some difficult decisions, and so it does in the case of New Zealand as well. So the 4 big questions that we've been asking our participants are these. Firstly, how does the electricity system actually work? And why is it designed that way? Because I don't think many of us actually understand it. It's to a certain degree magic. We turn on lights and they go on. We turn on the heater, it goes on. We don't necessarily know why. So when it doesn't work, we don't know why that is as well. Secondly, what drives power prices and how can they be made more affordable? Thirdly, how does energy affordability affect household and community well-being? And fourthly, what would a better system look like and how do we get there? And acknowledging when I say that there are people right now, such as Manu, who are working on the better system. And so this is not just imagining the future, it is actually seeing it through the eyes of the people who are doing the work. Now, there's a lot going on right now, and Manu and I actually, when we first started talking about this webinar series and Manu joining about 2 months ago, Manu, we said actually August would be a good time because it's when the system comes under some of its biggest stress. And this is a headline from Radio New Zealand this morning, 9:42 a.m. this morning. Transpower issues power warning. Probably quite normal. It's the middle of winter. Everyone's turning on the heaters and the lights and everything else, and it's cold, and so that's somewhat to be expected. But of course, our system's going through transition, and as we've reflected through some of our guest speakers already, the electricity system is an extraordinarily complicated machine, and it doesn't just work by itself. It has to be actively managed continuously. And it's something I'm really, really interested in, as well as making sure we all get an appreciation of what some of those dynamics are. Now, this slide is impossibly dense, and I'm not going to read through it all. It's from the Security and Reliability Council, which is an amazing organization, and they have actually recently been talking about some of the security and reliability risks that there are in the system as it becomes more complex and as there are more generation typologies being introduced into the system. And they talked about these 6 or 7 different dynamics of stability and how they have to be carefully orchestrated all the time. I shared this report recently online, and rather than trying to explain it technically, because I'm not technical, I explained it in this way, and it's on the right. Imagine a tightrope walker who's trying to stay upright while keeping a steady pace, holding a pole level, adjusting to gusts of wind, on a rope that heats and stretches, wearing slippery shoes, and avoiding a rhythm that makes the rope start swinging wildly. That is the unenviable world of an electricity system operator. So it's a complicated system, and during these times of peak demand, it gets more complicated. This is a graph of spot energy prices for the last 24 hours or so on the left. And we can see a big spike last night from very, very low prices right up to over $4,000. I think that's a megawatt hour, isn't it? Yes. And that is probably a combination of that significant demand. I think Transpower said this morning that they had the heaviest demand on the electricity system ever recorded last night. But on the right there's also an excursion notice from Transpower, which was for the Huntly Generation power station tripping, and I assume it means tripped out. And what that did was it actually affected one of those stability variables, which is the frequency of the system in terms of hertz. And if it goes beyond a certain frequency, parts of the system can trip out, which is what we saw in Spain last year. So it's a dynamic, complicated system that we are talking about. I'm not an expert in it at all. I'm barely understanding this myself, but it's really something to understand when we start talking about changing the system. So with that, it is my real pleasure to introduce Manu Barrett to the webinar series. I met Manu through my friends at Rokawa a few months ago, and it's been a real pleasure to hear about his journey in terms of energy security, affordability and reliability. Manu has a really, really interesting background. He's a professional pilot by training, amongst many other things, and has got into the energy system and understanding the technology involved with that, and being at that forefront of how do we make energy much more affordable and reliable and available to communities who need it when they need it in a way which is really sustainable as well. So Manu, it's a real great pleasure to have you join the webinar series. I'm going to just stop sharing and then hand over to you, my friend, and then you can share your slides and take us on the journey with you. So kia ora. Thank you so much, Manu.
Morena. Yeah, no, thank you very much, Harvey, for the opportunity. Yep, so morena tātou, ko ai au, ko manatahu Barrett ahau, he uri tainui me Ngāti Maniapoto me Kaitahu, he kaiwhakahari o SolarSense. So I will just share my slides. Can we all see that?
That's good, Manu. Yep.
Oh, right. So Solar Sense. So I thought I'll give a little bit of context. A few of you are familiar with who I am and what I've done and what my journey is, but I thought this was actually a good little opportunity, one, to be recorded and to be shared, but also just to kind of delve into kind of a few aspects of, one, how I got here, and kind of also my journey. So for a little bit of additional context, I tell people I actually never set out in the beginning to actually enter the electricity sector, nor try and address energy hardship, and but that's been a pivot of kind of my journey and how we got here. But hopefully the slides in my little presentation today will kind of give a little bit of context of where I came from, how I ultimately ended up here, but mainly my journey and kind of a lot of the stuff that we came across, we had the challenges that we had to face, but some of the mahi that we have done, with the ultimate goal of, well, trying to make the electricity sector a bit more of a fairer system. So SolarSense, we are a solar and battery solutions, as well as a energy kind of navigator, based here in Te Awamutu. Now, we've done some wider work around predominantly the Central North Island. Now, we've got a relatively small team, so we have currently an active team of 3 people, but we have also had 2 co-founders. So Aubrey Takano was instrumental in the first 4 years of my business, as well as Johnny, who was our lead investor in our company. Although a small company, much like I'd like to say, much like our energy, I think we punch far above our weight in terms of what we're able to achieve. This is our company today. Further to that, we do an extensive amount of work, and we've partnered with Tūmaira, which is another solar energy company based here, or it's actually based in Tauranga. So as the last year, we've done extensive amount of work together, and we've actually partnered on a number of projects. So for the best part now, ourselves and Tūmaira are essentially tagged at the hip. We share a lot of values, a lot of goals, and we're aligned very well in a lot of the work and the mahi that we do. But so how did I get here? So my actual background, although my highest qualifications were in engineering, I actually came from the aviation sector. So I was 7 years as a pilot and 7 years in the air traffic sector. And I was initially had a small side hustle, and the vision was to actually have a tech company. But a lot of this was actually accelerated during 2020, during the lockdown and during COVID. And it was actually fortuitously during this period, I actually was accepted into a business accelerator, which was the Kokiri Māori Business Accelerator. They selected 9 tech companies with very early stage concepts to see whether we could get market ready. And we came through the 2020 cohort. Now, during this time I actually stepped back from my career in aviation, and what our initial business was actually called Barrett Dynamics. Now, we rebranded it to SolarSense, but our original concept was actually solar tracking systems. So the initial concept was to develop a solar tracking system. Now, at this point in time, ground-mounted solar wasn't a thing here in Aotearoa. We did foresee it becoming here, and the opportunity for me was like, maybe I could develop, design, and promote a piece of technology which could actually enhance solar generation. And the idea was actually it was a pure tech solution or pure tech offering, and we were to develop it, test it, and the idea was to sell it off to the up and coming solar farms that were all being touted to arrive here in Aotearoa. Now, the picture to the left is an actual working example that we had in Ragland. Now, although conceptually a great idea. What we did find though was it was in practice quite inefficient and quite expensive. So during our journey in Kokiri, we actually went out, so we had the opportunity to go and validate not only the actual hardware, but see whether there was a market appetite. Now, unfortunately, there wasn't actually much of a market appetite at all. In fact, ground mounted wasn't even a thing back when we first started, and a lot of the other groups that we're able to get in front of, which were the early stage developers that were looking to do large scale ground mounted, weren't interested. They'd already selected their own solutions, their own technologies in which they were going to develop these solar farms. Now, it was a little bit deflating at the time, like, oh, cool, and because we'd worked on this for probably about a year, we thought we had a real good solution, a good product, and unfortunately, there was actually essentially no market for it. However, it wasn't all lost. So what was interesting is whilst we were actually going out and doing a lot of problem discovery and solution validation, we actually picked up a lot of information all along the way regarding the electricity sector. And there was actually one other team that was part of the Corporate Accelerator, and that was No Maira. Now, they were trying to address the energy hardship issue at the time, and they were the very early stages. So during the Kokiri program, they had about 50 residential customers at the time, but we were able to actually understand and get to understand the electricity sector a lot better, one from their perspective, but also could there be some avenues in order to pursue from our end, from a generation and or tech point, that could actually support what No Maira were trying to achieve. So that's when it got me kind of thinking, is around could SolarSense, could our understanding at the time and use of hardware and potential solar generation be used to then support the likes of No Maira and other retailers to then forward it through the benefit and savings to customers. So that was essentially the genesis. So that's where we made the pivot from initially a solar tracking technology to, okay, there's actually a broader, wider issue within the system, and there are other people. In fact, there was No Maira being in the same cohort that were trying to find solutions for this very problem. Now, to one of your questions that you've put out to presenters. So, how does electricity affordability affect households and the community well-being? So, in terms of, and I'll probably talk a bit more. So this presentation is probably going to be a bit more energy hardship heavy. So I will go into some technical aspects, but it will be a little bit heavy on the energy hardship. But in terms of energy hardship, it's an issue. It's actually it's a problem that's kind of always been around. But when I talk about energy hardship, or specifically when I'm looking at targeting solutions, much to what Jonathan said the other week, is I'm focusing on the electricity hardship. So the energy system as a whole is made up of a whole heap of different aspects. But when I'm talking about energy hardship, I'm more specifically talking about electricity hardship. But in terms of any energy hardship, power poverty, energy insecurity, I mean, whatever you want to call it, the issue has been around. I mean, it's been around for a very, very long time, and it's slowly grown as more and more things have become electrified in the homes. However, the problem has, for the most part, only sat within a small group. So although the problem's always been there, it's generally only affected a very small part of the population, and that's generally your low income, low socioeconomic part of society. Now, what you've seen probably more recently, in the more recent years, as this has actually started to climb higher and higher into the middle income brackets and small to medium businesses, which I'll talk to a little bit further. But in terms of energy hardship, there's a lot of flow-on effects. So there's no one single, I suppose, it's a number of factors in which energy hardship then compounds when it comes to when you look at low socioeconomic whānau, and it's mainly because you have a relatively high cost of electricity here in Aotearoa. Although the housing stock's getting better, you still have a relatively poor quality of housing stock, which is homes that are uninsulated and relatively inefficient to heat. And it's our climatology. We live in a strangely temperate environment, so you can actually get relatively cold nights, but the days become warm enough where the days become warm enough where mold can still exist. And this has a whole heap of flow-on effects, predominantly with generally during this time of year, during acute respiratory and sickness admissions into hospitals. Now there's a couple of people that they've done some really good mahi around this, so I won't go into full detail, but the likes of Kimberly O'Sullivan from Otago University, Anna Burker from Mass University have delved very deeply into kind of how the poor housing stock, high cost of electricity, and our particular climatology kind of all come together to do a perfect storm when it comes to affecting those in high deprivation. As I mentioned before, the energy hardship used to kind of only really exist in a small portion of society, and again, it was like, if we're honest, it was a portion that not a lot of people really cared that much about. It wasn't really until it started creeping into the medium middle income and started affecting businesses, and you're probably talking to the last probably 2 to 3 years is where actually people started to really take note, and hence why you're probably seeing a lot of as we're coming into election year, a lot of political parties talking about talking about energy and the price, and all kind of allowing different solutions to try and mitigate those rising costs. The other one was small to medium businesses. So, and it's kind of how we got into this business of, got into the line of work which we do now, which is kind of a lot of supporting a lot of small to medium businesses and organisations around strategizing their kind of current and future, both energy reduction but energy strategies. And this slide here was actually one I presented probably about 2 years ago at a energy conference, and at the time people were quite skeptical. They were like, oh, is energy hardship really affecting those in the middle income? Is it really affecting those in the SMEs, the small and medium businesses? And I was challenged a few times, but I said, look, the only reason why I'm raising this is because we're actually getting an influx of people from a group that never reached out to us before. Not only are they weren't necessarily asking for solar, they were asking, how do we, one, understand our power bills, and two, how do we either reduce or kind of limit the price escalation of electricity within their businesses? Because a lot of the small to medium businesses were your family owned, your mum and dad businesses. They weren't businesses that had preferential time of use, such as large industrial users. So they too were not only feeling the rise and escalation of electricity at home, but also the businesses that they owned. And it was initially anecdotal that we started to pick this up about 2.5 years ago. But I think we can all agree now that this wasn't just anecdotal. This is an actual issue, and a lot of it that you're starting to see now. So that in mind, coming back to around how did we want to try and address some of these issues? So the genesis was, all right, can we use our technical skills and some of our knowledge that we've built up around solar? can we develop a project that can be passed through to somebody that's already in the sector, such as No Maida, to then help use that as a benefit to lower either one, to mitigate the cost escalation, or kind of help support those that are in need. And what I didn't understand, or I didn't actually know the term at the time, but I wanted to test the theory. Could you have remotely located energy assets and actually have them targeted a specific group? Now, at the time, I didn't realize it was actually called a virtual power plant, but I wanted to be able to test the theory. Could this be done? Now, at this point in time, I had very little understanding. I mean, I was a young, naive, kind of over-optimistic aviator trying to, with this crazy kind of plan to try and do something within the energy sector. And at the time, I didn't really know a lot of people. So my first port of call was kind of to try and understand the energy sector in a little bit more detail. And I actually ended up going to the Electricity Authority website, and at the time, it's not there anymore, but at the time they had the education portal. And when I went into it, that was what I was presented with. So it was a complex web, and unfortunately not of a lot of use to me. But what was fortunate to us at the time was that there was actually a number of people that kind of all started when we had started. So there were a few groups, and I want to make some mention to a lot of them. Now, I didn't respect it at the time, I do now, but at the time I didn't realize that I was very lucky that the timing that I entered, that there was a number of people that would ultimately reach out and work alongside to help me understand the sector. So I'll just make some honourable shout outs. So to John Campbell of Our Energy. I mean, John's been very, he's been instrumental to me understanding the sector. I mean, a lot of it was gibberish to me. But also No Maida, they showed us a lot of the early stages, the understanding of the retail sector, kind of how the system worked, but also a lot of what we were doing aligned with them. Also want to do a little honourable mention to, now they don't work for MB anymore, but Daniel Brown and Brian Vass. So there was actually a fund that was put together that we were ultimately successful in trialling our concept. So I just wanted to thank them, but also the team of Araaki. So they were formed around the same time too, around that 2020 period. And although they are now essentially been disbanded, and the current CE isn't Cristiano, but this group was actually very supportive and very were able to source funding to be able to actually get a lot of our conceptual ideas into practice. Now, I'll probably jump around a little bit, but I know one of the questions is how does the electricity system actually work? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through an infographic that I've put together that I do with my clients. And the reason why I do it is there's tends to be a lot of confusion around almost every person that I engage of how does the system work, who does what, where's all your power bill allocated, who kind of is in the mix. So I'll run through a little bit of a slide that I show all my clients and customers. Now, some of your eagle-eyed viewers will notice it's the rewiring Aotearoa infographic. So thank you for them. Just little thanks for being able to use their infographic. But in terms of the electricity sector, you have generation, transmission, distribution, metering, and retail. Now, as we know, there's a whole heap of other intricate parts to the system, but the five main, the ones that I touch, are these 5 parts of the sector. So generation, now your 4 big ones, your 4 big generators, Genesis, Mercury, Meridian, and Contact. As you'll know, they also have retailing arms, hence the name Gentailer. But we also have a number of generator only. Some good examples is Lodestone and Tuatapaki, which generate electricity, but they also have partnerships with retailers, but they are predominantly generators only. This works out, this contains about 30% of what your average power bill is. Just another little kind of note, you'll see that there is my percentages in terms of power bill are a little bit different to the averages, and the reason for this is these are the general averages for the client group that I work with within the Central North Island, and these will vary based upon where you are in the country. But again, just as a side note. Then we have transmission. So tell people, like, the transmission is the goal of what this does is actually gets it from your big centralized power stations to your substations in your town. The transmission network is owned by Transpower, and this represents about 10% of your power bill. But that's the physical thing. So the transmission is a physical thing, but there is a virtual part to the transmission, which is the wholesale market, which is essentially operated through the New Zealand Stock Exchange. Now, a few of you eagle-eyed viewers will know, well, a hedge is not indicative of the spot market price, which it isn't, but the hedges and futures usually pass through the NZX as they're cleared anyway. Hence why I show people actually the visual representation of the physical thing is the energy market that we see in front of us. Then distribution. So again, New Zealand's quite unique. I mean, it was actually interesting when Jonathan mentioned the other week that, you know, Aotearoa used to be made up of 95 different power boards, which essentially all basically joined together to become what the system was at the time. Currently, I believe there is 28 EDBs. I mean, it moves around. Those amongst us will know that First Light no longer exists and it was absorbed by another EDB. But when I show people, I said, this is how many lines companies there are within New Zealand. I said, but not only that, they are both, some of them are public owned, some of them private owned, some of the community owned, each have their own pricing methodologies, each have their own set of rules, some are consistent, some are inconsistent. So this part usually takes a lot of people by surprise because they don't quite know what the role of a lines company is and where they sit or where their boundary is and everything in between. But I tell people their job is to get the power from the substation through to your home. And this represents about 30% of your bill. But also touching on this is around your power prices. So although we have, as we've been seeing our power prices increase, they increase in different areas. So currently at the moment, part of the reason why your power bills are increasing is actually from the distribution side, and it's because a lot of the lines companies are actually playing catch up with a lot of their asset replacement, but also demand and growth. Metering. So metering only accounts for about 5% of your power bill, but again, this is another area where a lot of people don't actually understand that their actual power meters are owned by completely separate companies altogether, and essentially it's just a data gathering device to be able to forward through to be able to collate your power bill. And lastly, retailing. As mentioned before, you have your 4 big retailers: Contact, Genesis, Mercury, and Meridian. But also to note that the likes of Frank Energy, Ecotricity, Glowbug, and PowerShop are actually fully owned subsidiaries of the big 4. So Frank Energy, Ecotricity is fully owned by Genesis, Glowbug is by Mercury, and PowerShop by Meridian. So by being with PowerShop, you actually are with Meridian. Now, some of these actually began as independent, truly independent retailers, but were essentially gobbled up by the larger gentailers. And then of course you got your independent retailers, so your Octopus, Electric Kiwi, No Mida. Now some people go, oh, very independent. I consider them kind of independent. Yes, granted they have some generation and they're the feedstock for the gas to Genesis and Contact, but I do view them as an independent. And they make up about 10% of your bill. So when I go through people and I tell people, actually your bill's made up of a whole combination of each of these groups, and depending where you are in the country and who you've selected, this comes together in a completely different order. But back to our virtual power plant. So so we got the chance. So we were lucky enough back in 2021 that we got some funding from. We were successful in getting funding from MB and being able to actually physically demonstrate the concept of a virtual power plant. Now, we partnered with the Ngāti Maniapoto Marae Pack Trust, which is located here in the King Country, and what they wanted to do was, their aim was to reduce or find a way or methodology to reduce the power bill of tribal members to that they had identified as being in energy hardship. Now, one of the issues with people that whakapapa or belong back to Ngāti Maniapoto was that about 80% of their uri actually don't live within the King Country. So they wanted to try and see, they wanted to know, was there a way that they could support their whānau irrespective of where they were in the country using land that they owned. So what we did was we actually built 3 small-scale ground mounted solar farms on one beef and sheep farm and 2 dairy farms. Now both of these were all these farms were actually future-proofed to be significantly larger, but it was to conceptually prove that the concept could work. And then what we did was we actually from that generation passed through essentially the electricity sales or the benefit through to 14 of their tribal members. Now, the original plan was to actually do it through no maira, but what we ultimately ended up doing was going through our energy. But we ran this for this project for a year, and we were able to actually identify that this concept worked, and it was actually a tangible way to address a problem. Now, a few people have asked me, I said, is this the solution or is this the silver bullet? And as I've mentioned to a lot of people, I said that there is no silver bullet. I said, this is just a way of doing it. I said, there's actually a number of different ways you can solve it. This is just a way we chose to try in a way that worked specifically for this group. But much like the rest of the journey, I mean, we didn't, even the technical sector, we didn't really know a lot. And ground mounted systems were never a thing. And in fact, a lot of distributed generation at the time, there wasn't a lot of it. I mean, there's been a large uptake now, but back when we first started in 2020, I mean, again, it was much the same as the retail sector. Was kind of understanding the retail sector. It was kind of baptism by fire. So we just started at a point and kind of said, all right, we'll just do it and see what happens. We were very fortunate that the Lions Company, which our first bigger projects were actually very accommodating. So they were, again, a bit of a kudos for the Lions Company. I mean, they get a little bit of flack around their Lions pricing, but they were, of all the Lions companies that we've worked with to date, they were actually the most supportive in the technical aspects. But again, a lot of this was we just tried it. We weren't even too sure whether we were doing it right. But working alongside people that were competent, were able to actually develop the physical and the technical things. So this is one of the 3 sites that we did the project. So this is just for context. So this is based in Tianga. So this particular site here, the Ngāti Maniapoto Marae Pack Trust, are actually planning to extend to about 25 times that size. So that's a 25 kilowatt array. They're due to bump it up to about a 200 kilowatt array quite shortly. Now, we did do actually a snapshot evaluation of not only the project itself, but the actual impact that it had on whānau. So we recorded the financial benefit and what that meant and how that was passed on, and what benefits the whānau had of those 14 participants. We did it in a report in conjunction with Waikato University. What I'll do is I'll actually send through a link or copy that to Harvey, so you can share that, and people can kind of go through and see what the impact of that was. Constraints. Now, this is probably touching base on a little bit of the kōrero that Rewiring Aotearoa had on the series about a month ago, and a few people asked me, like, kind of what are the constraints and barriers, and Jonathan again touched base on this last week. I said one part of it is the heavy regulatory environment, which kind of limits a lot of stuff, and that's kind of a lot of the solutions that we developed. There were a lot of limitations because we had to kind of contort it to fit the current system, and not only that from a retail point of view, but it was also from a technical point of view. So we've also ran into a lot of issues in the technical realm. And interesting enough, a lot of the stuff, even like during the journey around building solar farms, it wasn't the fact that people, weren't supportive. It's just the rule books were so far behind that they just didn't know, and they just didn't want to be responsible for, if being kind of if anything happened to go wrong. So I mean, there was a lot of that happened as well. But the other big one is access to favourable capital and lending, and I think Rewiring Aotearoa touched base on this, and that's probably one of the biggest limitations that we've come across. Now, in terms of a lot of the work we do now, so a lot of the work we do is a lot of strategy building, a lot of feasibility studies, a lot of working with a lot of clients, a lot of iwi, small to medium businesses, and we can derive these amazing concepts and ideas and kind of strategies, but the biggest issue is capital, trying to get, where do you get the funding to do it? And that's kind of, unfortunately, where a lot of it kind of hits a wall. And another part I thought, and it's to this point around capital, is I suppose as a example was when I was at field days this year. So it was when we went around, there was actually a lot of really favourable capital and lending for farmers, for the agriculture and the dairy sector. So a lot of farmers could go and actually get quite large loans at between 0 and very low rates for solar or battery. But if I was a cool store or was a cafe, those same financial tools aren't actually available to me. They are in the dairy and the agricultural sector, but only for that sector. And then if you try and delve out of that, so I suppose having a broad access to capital and lending, I suppose, is one of the biggest barriers to actually getting any of these opportunities off the ground. And I suppose lastly, the opportunity and kind of what does a better system look like. Again, there's no silver bullet. I think one of the biggest opportunities is actually being able to have a whole lot of various other solutions. Now, again, alternative approaches to current electricity retailing models. I mean, you're getting electricity today is still very much a legacy kind of architectural legacy process. If I want to get power, you go to a gentailer predominantly, and you only get one power one specific way. It's you sign up to be a member of, say, Mercury. You are then given electricity at a set price, and it comes from a big asset at one point in time. I mean, and as an example, I mean, for all for some of their floors, which is Solar Zero, what they did prove though is there was an alternative method to be able to provide people electricity, one with no capital upfront, but through a different business model. And I think that's where a lot of innovation sits, is actually within the business models. And that's whether that be through a subscription service or using a virtual power plant mechanism, much like what we did with the Ngāti Maniapoto Marae Pack Trust, because it also opens those types of offerings for groups such as renters, for those potentially on low income, which is essentially directly what the project that we did helped to alleviate, but also people with leased premises. But the other big part was, and I think which has been really good, and a lot of more people are talking about it, is using kind of residential located solutions to empower distributed customers. And really you're starting to get a lot of this talk is around balcony solar or battery storage, which can be used when paired with time of use pricing to actually help shave those peaks, but kind of overarchingly lower the price of electricity, because you're smoothing out those massive spikes that you get. But with those solutions such as the balcony solar, which is now a bit of a hot topic, much the same in the slide that you have here, this was a system, these were systems that we developed for a separate purpose. They were actually resilient solutions that we built for the Whairawhiti's civil defence, but they had the capability to do exactly what balcony solar could do. It's just the technical limitations was that WorkSafe deemed these types of solutions that you're technically not allowed to do it. You can't feed back through a PowerPoint, even though these are capable of doing it. So I mean, big part of it is kind of bringing together a lot of these smaller solutions, which can then help the overall system. But yeah, Mihi nui, that's my little talk. So I jumped a little bit all over the place, but yeah, happy to talk about any questions that some people may have, and if people want me to go over stuff. But yeah, that's my little presentation.
Oh, awesome, Manu. Thank you so much, my friend. That was a really great presentation. We've got a pretty small audience today. It's small but important, and so I think rather than trying to formalize it, probably what I'll do in a second is just open the floor to John and Gareth. I think John's asked a question anyway, and we can just have a direct korero. If I can just maybe just start with a question out of real curiosity, the virtual power plant and the example of Maniapoto. What does it look like to one of those 14 households? Do they get a bill with some sort of discount line on it, as if the panels were on their own roof? What does it look like to them, and how does that work?
Yes, I didn't go into a whole heap of detail, but in terms of that, how we did that was the electricity was basically sold on the spot market, and that was done via John. So John actually did that. That was then cashed out. And then what we did is we redistributed it to the 14 households against their power bills. So they could remain with their existing power retailer. What we found was actually really hard to get people to change. And I think it was Jonathan mentioned it the other week, because, there could be a $400 benefit from people if they switched. But when you think of low socioeconomic, a lot of these people have really bad credit ratings, so they're afraid if they leave, they can't get back in. So they'd rather stay with the enemy they know than the one they don't. So we knew there was a big issue. So what we did was we just directly credited. So we needed their account number and the ICP number, but we could directly account their power bill. So that's how we did it. So some of the households, I can't remember the exact number, I've got it in the report, but for some of the households, it was a meaningful impact. But it was a function of, if you had a bigger system, like if we did it today, again, it would be way different, because you'd have batteries and you had so much more efficient, it'd be cheap, you can make them bigger and all sorts of different things like that. But that's how we did it. It was basically electricity was generated, sold in the spot market via John, it was cashed out and then redistributed against the power bill. So they didn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
and it did help. So one whānau managed to get into credit during summer, so that way they didn't have a deficit in winter, and some of them it helped manage their power bill. So that, in essence, that's how the system worked.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, look, Gareth had a question. Gareth, do you want to maybe just put the question straight to Manu? I'll get out of the way.
Yeah, all good. Kia ora, Manu. Thanks for that. I'm just slowly writing my own presentation, and I think a big chunk of this is going to be what you've just been talking about. But I just wanted to pick one bit in there around building trust in terms of how you worked with Maniapoto and Rokawa, because it's so complex, right? And I might steal that image that you've got. I'm not sure if you stole it from someone, but yeah, the one that had all of the interactions when you went to the EA. I mean, that's complicated for someone who knows what they're looking for and what they're doing. If you're sort of trying to present a reasonably big renewable energy project to people who aren't from the sector, they have to trust you that you're giving them good information. And so just curious about the process you went through. I mean, there might be some historical trust there that you've leveraged, but just how much time did that take to build into those projects that you just needed to have lots of conversations with them?
Yeah, a lot of front loading. So I suppose in one aspect for us, it was a lot of in each relationship. So that be the Ngāti Maniapoto Marae Pack Trusts, whether it be Rokawa, and Waikato Tainui or Tainui Group Holdings, which are now basically our biggest clients. They were actually all skeptical. They all had their heckles up the whole time. They were very standoffish, like all of them. And it just takes a bit of time to work through. I think for me, I was just kind of really honest. I said, look, I don't, in the beginning, I didn't really know what I was doing. I said, I just kind of like, it's a bit of a journey, but I brought them along. And I think the key part is if you bring people along for the journey so they can learn. A lot of people just got to go, oh, you stand there and we'll do it for you, rather than kind of showing them. I think that's helped quite a lot with all of them. I kind of show them what you're doing and why you're doing it. But again, it just took time. It got a little bit easier as we went along the road, but once we got the trust of Ngāti Maniapoto Marae Pack Trust, they had good word in from some of their senior leaders, and that kind of led on to Waikato Tainui, which then led on to Tainui Group Holdings, which then led on to Whanganui Iwi, which then led on to Rokawa. But each of them, all the first initial interactions, they were all like, very quiet conversations, put it that way. Like you'd walk into a room and like nothing, and then you slowly get to know them all. But if that helps, it's just time and trust, and just trusting the process of just getting to know them, really.
Yeah, and just sort of acknowledging John in this one too. There's a resilience and patience required, is my sense. You just have to keep showing up and being honest as well. If you don't know the answer, you don't know the answer. We'll go away and work on it and come back to you, sort of thing, rather than try and give them what they think they need.
And I think hearing them out, I suppose the big thing, it's all natural to me now. I suppose not to say natural, but now I've just done it so many times. But I think the part is actually listening to them. I think what tends to happen a lot of the time is people going, oh, I've got the solution for you. And they just try and go, oh, this is what you need. And it's like, and they're like, is it really? But they want to be heard. So most of the times they just want to be heard. They said, because each one, even all the iwi, there's a slight variation of what they want or what they're trying to achieve. And they just want to be kind of like, this is what we want. This is our vision. It may sound silly, but can you please hear us out and can you get us there? I'm like, I'll try. I said, I can't. I said, there's a lot of people reach out to support, but I said, honestly, that's listening to them is probably, and as silly as crazy as the dream may sound, that's probably just hearing them out is probably one of the big ones.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Awesome. John or Don, any thoughts or comments you'd like to share? Ask Manu.
John knows everything. He's across half of the stuff I know anyway. He knows you too. We've been in this battle forever. But nah, so no, it's been Been an interesting one, eh, John? Holy, yeah.
Yeah, just Manu, I think I'd just say, look, the stuff you guys have been doing, and all of us in the sector, Gareth and others, it's what some others would term, God's work in trying to get, community energy and energy communities off the ground. And it is a real missing piece in the New Zealand electricity system jigsaw, about how we do this. And it's one that, certainly my team, our energy, is still committed to. And I'll be talking in a few weeks about, some of our plans around that, in that space still. But yeah, the reason it doesn't exist at scale in the way we would probably like to and describe is because it hasn't been designed. The system hasn't been designed to do it that way. It's not because it's less efficient or more expensive or anything like that. It's just that that's not the way the system, the market, has been designed. And really keen to dig into more of that in the future sessions, both my own and the others coming up. So no, well done, Manu. Goodbye.
Thanks, John. All right. Well, unless there's any other comments or points of conversation, we've got a couple of minutes before midday. I'm not trying to end the kōrero prematurely. It's been really, really great, Manu. Unfortunately, Ernie had to go away and wasn't able to join us today, which leaves me to pretend to be wise about this for just a second. But the little things that I wrote down, and I think, John, you kind of touched on it there as well. And I do want to just to say that I'm speaking as the amateur in the room by a very long margin. The point that you made, the system wasn't designed necessarily for innovation, and yet people like Manu and everyone on the call today are finding those opportunities. And I suppose the thought that I had, and Manu, you're the evidence of it, there are other ways to do this. There's space between the big centralized system and individuals all having something on the rooftop. There's a space there in the middle, and you've shown how that can work. And that's really awesome. And just your stories, I suppose, about meeting people where they are, and trust and patience being really, really significant. And whether that's the individual who is either not able to or just has a natural reluctance to change power providers, because we all do. That's really, really difficult. But I thought, your examples of iwi, and I'm sure there are people knocking on their door all the time saying, I've got something to sell you. How about this? But the thing that really struck me was in your kōrero, in your story, it's not just about selling power, it's about well-being. And I'm not using that word for my advantage, but there's a purpose to what you do. And I think that's the really, really impressive thing. And the story is really, really strong there. So, it's about the people. And I really, really do thank you for sharing that with us today. So once again, Manu, thank you, my friend. As an amazing presentation, really, really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone for coming along today. I'll just quickly flick back to my slides and just capture where we're going next with the hui, with the webinar series, pardon me. So just in terms of upcoming speakers, on the 19th of August is our first bit of overt political kōrero about the electricity system. Kuile Wong, the leader of the Opportunity Party, will be joining us. What I've decided to do is to invite speakers from political parties who have shown a deliberate and looks like well thought out approach to energy and electricity affordability, and Kuile was one of the first people I invited in that regard. So she'll be along in a couple of weeks' time. The book for the rest of the series is filling out as well. I'm not going to read out all the presenters there. We've got two of them on the call today. Thanks, guys, for coming along. I've just also managed to capture Paul Fugue from Consumer New Zealand. You might have seen the report they put out in the last couple of days. I've had a bit of a read of it. Looks really interesting. So they're going to be here on the 26th to talk about that. Simon Bridges is along shortly after that, and they've just put out a report as well. There's some consistency and some differences between those reports. Manu talked about No Mai Rā. They're here shortly afterwards in September as well. And then John, and then Gareth as well. And we've also just secured Stu Hamilton from Mercury New Zealand to come and talk to us in October. And I will be honest, I had some reservations about giving too much of a platform to any gentailer in this series, but I think it's only reasonable and right that we actually have a gentailer speaking to us about how the system is working and the opportunities from their perspective as well. So it'll be good to have Stu joining us. So plenty more to come leading up to November. And the last speaker at the moment is Blair Dickey from the Waikato Regional Council. They've actually released an energy strategy, or they're formally releasing it on the 12th of August, and this time next week. All right, so that's pretty much it. I'm speaking to the converted today, so you all know that the webinars and all the material are online. So please get along and have a look if you haven't already, and share it with all your stakeholders and workmates and friends. It's really worth having a look at. There's a lot there. That pretty much ends the hui. Thank you very, very much again, Manu, for taking all the time to put together that presentation. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody else for coming along as well. So I'll just finish us with a karakia. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o te tātou uriki, o ihu karaiti, me te araha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tangitaha, ki te wairua tapu ake ake, āmene. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Ka kite.
Ka kite.